What I got here is a man that is not afraid to tell exactly what he is because he has all the qualifications, he has all the confidence in himself, he has all the abilities. It is truly wonderful to have you here, Mr. Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful. It is a pleasure for me personally, as a man, as an athlete, and as a gentleman, to have you here. God bless you for coming on. I love you. How you doing?
You know something, Rod? In the past few weeks, I've been watching the Piper's Pit.
Yeah.
And you know something? I think it's wonderful. It's very wonderful. And thank you for all those wonderful words. Same to you, brother. It's great.
That's
I deserve you, and you deserve me. You know,
right. You know what? There's nobody that has a body quite like yours. There's nobody that has the speed.
That is true.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Tyler Elenick, and this is Some Kind of Wonderful with Travis Orndorff. Travis, how you doing, my friend?
December was rough for me, and
was Christmas big with your dad and your family? Was he a big Christmas guy, like hanging lights and all that stuff?
No, we never did I think our lights stayed up on the house year round.
Wasn't a Clark Griswold situation?
No, holidays were never, in my mind, growing up, were never that big of a deal, because a lot of times he was traveling, and so we had Christmas together, and Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, but I don't know, because of all the stuff that kind of happened in my family, holidays were a lot of chaos, and then for years I worked in retail, so I would work every holiday, and so getting to the holiday, that day off was like, I finally get a day off. Could care less that we're opening presents. I just want some sleep. So the holidays have always been, I wish I was more sentimental about them. I'm getting more sentimental as I get older, but I don't put a lot of stock in them. But just because I don't think I had a lot of great holiday experiences, but it was still a time where I knew I would see them, right? But somewhere around the new year, and I don't even know why, I just came to some inner peace and felt some a sense of purpose, and then also kind of understanding where I wanted to take the podcast and our websites and things that I want to do to make sure we honor Dad this year as we take off. We just kind of got started, so I was excited that I'm glad Garrett was the first one, because obviously our relationship. But we brought in Falon, and both of us being the youngest in the family, so having that kind of the baby perception. But I'm truly excited with what we got going on and what we have planned, and the things we got working on behind the scenes regarding merchandise and some other things, and getting control of my dad's his image and likeness, and making sure that we honor that. And been having a lot of fun interacting with fans on Instagram. I didn't think I thought it was more superficial at first when I first got on, but the kindest people on the planet are following us. I swear. They send some of the nicest messages. They appreciate just the little details that I can add. I assumed everybody knew that Mr. Wrestling #2's wife was made like Flair's robes and Rick Rude's robes, and made my dad's. I just assumed everybody knew that. I didn't know that was something that was maybe not as people weren't as aware. So I've had a blast, and at first it brought me to tears, but now it brings me joy because I just get to celebrate his life. There's a lot of people that message me stuff, and I try to respond to all of them, but man, there's some funny stories out there. I've gotten some great pictures. I've gotten a few confessions. That was, dude, but this is life, and this was a life he lived, and he had an impact. And
absolutely,
just like the quote said, hated him or love him.
That's right.
You felt some way about him. I'm getting stories and stuff that I don't think anybody's ever heard, pictures that anybody's ever seen, and just remembering, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So, Mr. Wonderful Official is the Instagram handle, all with the hopes to entertain, have fun, and share some crazy stories like you hear in this next episode from Falon.
And speaking of our next episode, you touched on it a bit, some of your interactions with Roddy over the years and some of your memories. Your dad and Roddy are synonymous together.
Well, I think I love their promos, every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
There's, in my opinion, Roddy didn't do a bad promo.
Right.
But my dad had some sketchy ones. Let's be honest. I saw some. Ivan Putski with the turtle head poking out. You remember
the turtle
that?
head
promo,
yeah,
and he's almost laughing in the thing, and it's so. But Roddy didn't cut a bad promo ever.
No,
that I know of.
No, he's a king.
I still think my favorite one would probably be and maybe because it's just the one that sticks out the most. There was one where my dad was wearing the red robe with the not the Mr. Wonderful robe. It was just a red robe,
right,
with the black. He starts telling him how much he loves him and what a great athlete he is, and he's totally sucking up to him. That's a great one, but my favorite will always be the one after WrestleMania when he went in there and he tells Ace to go to the corner and calls him a dunce. and he's like, you go, you sit, and Roddy sits down and Ace goes to the corner. Like that one was, and then Mr. T comes out. That was the thing about it was, and maybe it's compartmentalizing it. Like I always looked at that like a TV show. Like I would never run into somebody. I love the TV show Yellowstone, but I'm not going to run up to Kevin Costner number one because I'm not starstruck by anybody. It doesn't register with me, but I wouldn't go up to him and call him John Dutton.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I love that show, but it's Kevin Costner. And I'd be like, I enjoy your product, but I know you're not a murderer. Right. So when I saw Roddy, I'm like, oh, that's the character. But what he was like behind the scenes was very calm. And Falon even said he was quiet. He's not, that was a persona. That was something that he could turn on. And I think that maybe inside his head, that's what it sounded like. Cause that's how I I probably related to Roddy more than I did my dad, as far as just how, he's more of a talker than my father is. I'm more of a talker than my father is. Not better, but just more, just sheer volume, just volume up and volume quantity. So yeah, Dad and I would interact with Roddy, and so when I was young, I don't remember much other than he was just patient with me. But when it was older, when I ran him to the Hall of Fame, it was like seeing an uncle, But he was always like he came up and man, you look good. How you doing? It wasn't this He didn't come up after he had like 4 Adderall. He he was chill,
all hopped up.
So, and I don't think I ever interacted with him when he was hopped up ever, like nothing like that. And I can't say that I was ever around a wrestler that acted that way outside of them. Like it was separation of church and state. There was no they didn't come out of that. Some of them were they were all steroid filled, obnoxious, alpha males. So yes, there's going to be that, but the more famous ones, at least in my opinion, they had their run of partying, but most of them were kind of chill by the time they got to that point because they had kids, and they certainly were chill around me. I was either 8, 13, 15, 17. It wasn't like I was old enough to party with them.
All right. Well, we've teased it enough, I think, and we've blabbed enough to each other. So I think people would rather hear you and Falon talk than you and me talk.
I think they'd rather hear Falon talk, but they're going to have to listen to me as well. So let's kick this off, my friend.
All right. So once again, I am playing the Silent Bob to Travis's Jay. I'm there, but I'm not really there. So you'll hear him rocking the mic 99% of the time. You'll hear some laughter from me in the background. But without further ado, here it is, Travis Orndorff and Falon.
In Piper's Pit. Hey, Falon, it's so good to talk to you. I have to say it. I know we're going to have some kind of intro because Tyler always has something up his sleeve. But man, Piper's Pit.
Yes, Piper's Pit.
This is where it all started. Do you not know this? But the first Piper's Pit, my dad, Roddy, called him Mr. Wonderful.
Oh yes, I did know that actually.
So your father has been part of my life since I was born in this strange, surreal way. And as we've been talking, I grew up so siloed because, it's not like wrestlers hung out with other wrestlers in reality. When they did, they were partying. They weren't going and having like cookouts like normal people. But talking to you over the last couple of days, it's just a connected spirit. And I'm so glad we finally get to do this. This is just, I don't know. This is the highlight of my year so far. I got to be honest. It feels like I'm going back to my roots. So Falon, thank you so much. And obviously everybody listening, we are here with Falon, Roddy Piper's youngest daughter. So, Falon, how is your new year? And I know you just went through like 8 weeks of torture with the weather in Portland and the tragedies, and then you're also expecting a newborn here. So, how are you, and how's your new year?
You know, I'm doing great. I'm very excited for this new year, for everything to come, and for this podcast in this new year. How exciting. Thank you for having me on. I live a little more north of Portland. And yes, we had severe flooding right into severe snowstorm that was very, very low temperatures. And I am pregnant, very excited to welcome a new one. So going through all of that in early pregnancy was pretty intense when I already have 2 kids that I'm taking care of as well.
Because you lost, because we were texting before this, right? And then, of course, I'm texting one friend and like, hey, how you doing? And I don't watch the news. I just don't. I'm usually watching a documentary or I'm studying for something. And you're like, hey, yeah, we don't have power. And I'm like, oh. Yes. Oh, so I guess it's not a good time, and then
they cut power because it was flooding, and then they cut they didn't cut it, but the water towers were over flooded. So we didn't have power, we didn't have water. We were landlocked because there was just water completely around us. So we just had to sit at home and wait it out.
And then COVID on top of it, obviously.
And then immediately after the flood, we actually had the temperatures dropped very low for a couple weeks, a lot of snow and ice, and our water pipes froze because, again, everything was flooded. So I'm very happy for the weather to warm up and to just have normal weather for a little bit of normalcy.
Well, I'm convinced that that's the reason they've legalized marijuana in those states, is because they know you're going to be frozen in for a few weeks and they don't want you to go crazy. You're
not wrong. I mean, I can see that for sure.
Because I've been to Oklahoma, which has more pot than anywhere in the country. And I know why, because they stay indoors all winter long. It's freaking cold, man. I'm from Georgia.
Speaking of which, it's a very dark, gloomy, foggy day today. Like, I can't see my neighbor's house. It's so foggy.
Oh my God.
I mean, you can see it behind me, actually.
Well, I just thought it was a shade, but it's fog. No, so now that you say that,
fog, very gloomy.
We're about to have a very similar weather condition down here in Atlanta. We're going to get 0.4 inches of snow, and it will shut down the city for at least 2 to 3 weeks, I'm sure, because nobody knows how to drive in Atlanta.
No.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like you get ice on the roads and they'll shut down the schools 2 days in advance.
Wow.
But they're not prepared for it. I get it. They don't have the resources. Yeah. They've got like 1 dump truck of salt. That doesn't do you any good. But anyway, so coming out of that, Falon, I know we've talked about this, but you are the youngest child of Roddy, and you were born right before I graduated from high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I wanted to point that out real quick. But so we both, we connected, and it was kind of an immediate connection because we have the same stories, but they're different, right?
Yes, exactly.
But my dad was a little bit older than your father, so I think he was about 9 years older. So ironically, I think you came into the world about the same time as your dad was kind of getting out, and similar to my dad. And I was born in 1978. But so tell me, you were telling me like even the day you were born, you were introduced to wrestling. So tell us about that.
Yes. So I was born in 1994. My dad was 40 years old. So he had already done all his career.
Hey. Let's not get.
Okay.
Thank
young,
you. Okay. Yeah, he was.
Thank you. Wrestling perspective, 40 years old
ancient.
is, you're up there. You've lived your career. But anyways, and on the day I was born December 1st, and at 4 a.m. that morning, my dad had a limo coming to pick him up and take him to the airport to go fly to LA and get his hip replaced, a full hip replacement. Instead, the limo took him to the local hospital because my mom went into labor. So then I was born, and a couple hours later, my dad got on that limo and went to the airport, and he got his full hip replaced, came home, and my poor mother had to deal with my dad recovering from that and a newborn at the same time. And those wrestlers, when they're recovering from injuries, they're grouchy.
Oh my God.
We love them, but they can be very hard.
Yeah. It's funny that I think people don't understand that when they go out on the road, even back then, and I've said this before, they got catered to, right? So they were treated with such royalty. That there were times where I'd be around my dad and be like, yo, you're not Mr. Wonderful here. You're just dad. Like, and he would go, okay. Cause he was just kind of used to kind of bossing and telling and things like that. So they come home. They're not used to being at home. They're not used to sitting still. You're taking them out of their every bit of their comfort zone. And they're probably for the first time in a decade dealing with emotional pain that they have to sit in and deal with. They can't wrestle it every night. They can't drink it away. They can't snort it away. They got to sit in everything they've done, what their life has meant, and it makes them slow down. And, I think, my dad, obviously had the arm injury and then he had the back surgery. So from the time I was about 10, he was injured, right?
Yes.
Yours, obviously, when you were born, was that kind of a trend throughout your life that he was constantly in the hospital?
Absolutely. Like I said, he got his hip replaced the day I was born. He had multiple injuries that he had to recover from following years. He, when I was 12 is when he had cancer. And then between when I was born and 12, it was a very dark time for him in general. And so then going into him having cancer, and then he went to rehab for alcoholism right after that. And then right after that, he had horrible blood clots. And I just barely graduated high school. And then, unfortunately, when I was 20, he passed. So it was kind of the trend of my life, was him unhealthy and trying to just recover.
Yeah, I think, if we just pulled up, and I know there's a statistic out there, but like the wrestlers from WrestleMania 1, like their average lifespan is like 53 years.
Yes.
And I remember my dad got cancer. I was 30, but when he got cancer, it was later in life, and his facilities, his kind of mental facilities started to diminish. But after he went through chemo, it's like a light bulb turned off in him. I remember he had a 2nd through 8th vertebrae. They put in a cadaverous vertebrae with a titanium rod. And when he went through chemo and radiation, he ended up getting shingles from his chin down to the middle of his chest. And inside of his mouth, not to be gross, was, full, like top to bottom, left to right, full of ulcers from the radiation. He was literally covered inside his mouth. He had a tube of lidocaine for his mouth, and he had something for his neck. Didn't once take a pain pill. Like, he would use lidocaine and that was it. But that was the physical or the outward thing. But that was when his brain and like that synapse where, he could connect the dot between talking to me 1 second and remembering it the next. That was gone. Did you see after cancer Roddy diminish?
Yeah, I mean, after his cancer and his radiation treatments, the toll on his body was very obvious. But absolutely mentally, it made him slow down so much. And I think from when he had cancer and went through treatments to when he died, it was just every year was less and less function with his brain, less and less connection, I guess. I remember one time actually right at the end, this was about 2 weeks before he passed. We were in a restaurant. He had stopped in the town I was living in to have lunch with me before he went on to his next stop. And he couldn't pay for the bill because there was something functioning off in him that day, especially, and he couldn't sign his name. He just was really struggling. And I ended up having to help him, write out his name and pay for the bill and figure it out, because it just, like you said, over time it was just diminishing.
Did your dad talk to you? I know my dad talked to me a lot about more because he was trying to not scare me. He was trying to warn me. Did your dad talk to you about concussions and, some of the like blackout moments that he experienced? Obviously you saw the product of wrestling. And that's what I always tell people. I'm like, you would look at wrestling different if you grew up in my house. Yes. It's not this, you get even, and I didn't see, and forgive me, I don't watch a lot of television unless it's a documentary or something, but I did miss this one, which was the A&E documentaries on your father, and so I would be I would have watched it before. I watched a bunch of other stuff. I didn't even think to watch that, but I think people see those documentaries and they make it, they romanticize wrestling, and they, in my opinion, completely negate what it was like to be a father, a husband, dealing with a wife that had to see a man on the road and obviously deal with all the emotions of knowing what it was like and all those things. I mean, those women were tough. The women that stayed with those wrestlers were tough, but I'll say the women might one up them a little bit. But coming on and, people didn't really want to talk about all my dad's injuries, even when he got, later in life and he was subjected to some things in the hospital that were just ridiculous. Nobody wants to talk about that stuff. So, and you brought up something that obviously is near to me is, you talked about your dad going to rehab, and I never went that route, but I absolutely struggled with addiction. And, praise God, it's something I've had at bay for about 5 years, after a lot of hard work and some great mentors and a lot of faith. But I don't know that was that brought up in the documentary, the rehab and some of those other things that went on.
I think it was lightly touched on. I don't remember it. I mean, it definitely could have gone more in depth. I feel like you said, it's a lot of sugarcoating, romanticizing, happy, bubbly. And they'll say, my dad, he had a dark side. He had his demons that haunted him, and it was hard, but he was this great dad. And it's absolutely true. He was a phenomenal father, and I feel so blessed and lucky to have grown up with that. But, there were so many times that it was difficult and dark, not just for him, but for the whole family, and just struggling through his dark times with him. You don't hear as much about how that affected all of us as a whole.
Because he would spend much time, and he had so many people that loved him and so much affection for him that, they believe that character Rowdy is, the guy that goes home at night, and it's not. And sometimes it does come home, and that's the problem. When it does come home and there's no separation between, those two worlds. So now, I went through a program with my church. Did he go? Do you know where he? When he was in rehab, did he go to not just because of access and being out on the West Coast? Was it a Betty Ford, or was it anything like that, or something local?
His rehab was it wasn't on the West Coast. It was on the East Coast.
Okay.
He went there when I was a freshman in high school. So I was a little, teenage Falon. I was very in my own world. And at that time, when kind of everything came falling down and it was, okay, Dad's going to rehab, I was actually at a cheer camp, and they pulled me away because it had come on media that he was going to rehab. And so they pulled me away to tell me before the news kind of broke. And I remember just thinking, okay, here we go again. Probably not going to work. Very dismissive of it, and just trying at that time to just ignore it. And that was just kind of how I handled it as a teenager. It's how I handled a lot of things as a teenager.
I don't think so did I. And it's funny you should say that. We had to live a lie in public. And I didn't know that that's how I felt. But I remember, man, my brother was in jail, and, my dad, would be on the road, and there would just all be all this, crazy stuff going on. And I'm supposed to go to school and just act like everything's fine, just like any kid that's going through what we're going through. But on top of that, people have this perception that your life is perfect. My dad owned a bowling center, and we were going to church. So it wasn't like I could be like, hey, my brother's doing X, Y, and Z. And I said, that's just not, that wasn't even a thought.
Right.
But I know, addiction has ran in my family pretty prevalently. So knowing that my dad tried to keep me off that course from the beginning was one of the things he did was put me in private school. And I think you had a similar experience. You kind of, you being the youngest and me being the youngest, my brother being 10 years older than me, I got the more mature dad of the two.
Yes.
And certainly the one that had gotten some wisdom. And so, although I know we talked about rehab and I know it's early in the conversation, but I think it would be remiss if we left the rehab on the note of, where you were in ninth grade. I know you didn't have a lot of hope, but something came out of that was one of the more special things that ever happened. So, where people think that rehab doesn't help or it doesn't change lives, that's not true. It does. And a lot of people do struggle. That doesn't mean they don't find a lot of success. It doesn't mean it's perfect. They do find a lot of success. But just to give people kind of an idea what happened, could you share what you shared with me about what your dad said?
So he went through rehab and he was able to become sober, which was huge for my dad and huge for our family. And it was incredible. And after that, he really started this journey of healing the relationships around him. And, growing up, like I said, I love my dad, but there was a lot of hard times. There was a lot of things that happened that were very, very difficult as a kid going through. And a few years after rehab, we had repaired our relationship and it was amazing. And he sat me down and he just said, basically, look, I messed up. These were my mistakes. This is what I did. And none of it was your fault. And I am sorry. And you didn't deserve to have to deal with the consequences of that. Sorry, I get emotional when I think about it, just because, especially as a parent myself now, to have your parents sit you down and apologize about the wrongs that they've done, the mistakes. It was a very profound moment in my life. And it really showed the growth and healing my dad had gone through at that point. Yeah, it was amazing. And it really helped finish repairing our relationship. That's
why life has many journeys.
Yes.
And just so you know, I'd heard that story earlier, so I lost it a little bit earlier. And just so you know, Tyler, that's the first time he's heard the story, and he was getting misty-eyed. And because that, to me, that is the journey. You can talk about the rehab, and I did want to bring that up, but look at the journey and the fact that your father was sober later in life. That's, when the hardest time in life is to change habits, it's as you get older. True. So I know that, and I told this story to you, and I'm going to share part of it because I don't think I'll get in trouble. But my dad became a Christian. It was like 1985, and hit the pastor that led him to Christ was Ike Reichard. Anyway, they were out on the road, and it was my dad in the front seat, and he was driving, and Ike Reichard was in the seat, and Bobby Heenan and Roddy Piper were in the back seat. Anyway, they were driving down the road, and my dad was trying to get Ike to witness to him, and they just kept talking and interrupting. And finally, my dad stopped the car and turned around. Ike was telling me, stopped the car and turned around. It's like, you MFers, shut the F up. He's trying to tell you some GD things about Jesus, And so it was, that was my father witnessing at the time. I don't think they've ever come up with a track for that, but that was how he was witnessing at the time. Your father came to Christ later in life as well, and I think it was I believe it was shortly after that. I could be wrong about that, but I know that his faith was something that, for lack of better words, put his demons at bay, at least where he could see them, as opposed to embracing them. He went, oh, I don't have to have that. Now, he struggled with it, but again, he struggled with something he did for 20 years. It took him 20 years to quit it, but he quit it. So, when you think about your dad's journey and those, just all those years, how do you think his faith played into all of this? Because I remember seeing a picture of, no Jesus he was wearing with you, I think it was.
Yes.
And so knowing that he repaired his relationship with you after rehab and his faith, what were those conversations about faith from when you were young, and how did they evolve as you got older?
Yeah. He talked to me about God and faith my entire life. But I think it wasn't till the end there, or when I was older, that he really, for example, one of the last movies he did, I don't know if you know this, but it was The Masked Saint. And he was so proud of that movie. And he was telling me all about it. He practiced the script with me because he was like, it's finally something that has such a good message that I'm sharing. He's like, this is what I want people to see, which is ironic, I guess, now that ended up being his last movie. But I really feel like he had gone through so much and had lightly talked to me about faith and God for so long. And then all of a sudden it was just this wake up call for him. And he was like, it not just kept his demons at bay, but it gave him hope to keep going. And especially when his depression got really bad, it just was this, it gave him a lot of hope to keep going. And that gave me hope. And, one thing I guess I want to mention is when I was 12 years old and my dad got cancer, I had gone to a Bible camp. And let me rewind just a little bit more. At that same time when he got cancer, my great grandma died. And it was the same day that I found those out. So death was very prevalent for me all of a sudden. And I went to this Bible camp after that. And I was so scared of my dad dying. And someone, I don't know why you would tell this to a 12-year-old, looked at me and goes, well, he's going to hell. And I broke down crying. I know. I broke down crying and really turned away from thinking about God or anything for a few years there. And eventually I brought it up to my dad, and he goes, they don't know me. They don't know anything about me. They don't know where my heart is. They don't know that I'm with Jesus. They don't know anything about that. And so they can say what they want, but at the end, it's God who knows. And just hearing that from my dad, myself, obviously made me feel a lot better. And then, of course, the last voicemail from Hulk Hogan, that he left Hulk Hogan, was singing I'm Walking with Jesus. And I felt like that was the very last, when I heard it, it was the very last comfort for me of, that's right. I know my dad. I know Jesus was in his heart, even after what everyone saw on TV, what everyone thought about him. And that he would tell me that all the time. He would always tell me the Lord's Prayer. He would always go through all of that. And it was a side of him that I really think no one knew about.
That's a side that only we get to see. I try to tell people that. I try to say, you don't really understand what these precious moments were like with my father when I was reconciling his fame with his humanity. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, what I came to truly understand about my father more than I did anything, and I think I understood it about Roddy, because I got to see them when I was younger, and then I got to see him when I was 20, then I got to see him when I was, I got to see them over periods of time and have different hour-long conversations. You're not going to pick up much. It wasn't anything you caught on camera. Like the conversation I had with your dad at the Hall of Fame, it's not in any record book. It was just, we sat there in the lobby and talked for 30 minutes, ironically, about you. And he was showing pictures and talking about family and things like that and asking me how I was doing. And, most people, all they ever saw was the gimmick. They never got to see that other side where, I know how vulnerable your father was because he was vulnerable with me, and he had no reason to be other than he just knew me because I've been around him several times. And he kind of knew my dad talk, we didn't have to be on the road with them. They talked about us to each other. That's where, that was one of the things I know when your father passed, it broke my dad's heart. Like, he cried a lot because they had a very different relationship, I think, than most people would think in wrestling. That there was very much a mutual respect. Absolutely. They didn't hang out a lot, but they did talk a lot. Like, at one point, they were talking pretty regularly, later in life, of course. But that vulnerability in those moments where, you're trying to explain to your child, no, I don't go up and beat people, like that, which actually goes back to a question I think I get asked a lot. Maybe when was it that you're like, oh God, I'm going to have to deal with being Roddy Piper's daughter? Like, that's not my first name.
Kindergarten. I got beat up by some boys when I was in kindergarten because I was Roddy Piper's daughter. And I remember afterwards just thinking, what? Like, I don't even know what that means that I'm Roddy Piper's daughter. What are you doing?
So, yeah, I think I was able to run a little faster because I did get bullied. They tried to, but I remember I was pretty quick with my mouth, and that didn't always serve me well. But I remember somebody sitting there, and I remember just going, I'm serious. My daddy can beat up your daddy. Like, I'm for real. Like, you don't want to do this, And so I think, especially, I've shared this before. Like, I'm not kidding. I have people that come up like, man, I hated you in elementary school, and it was irrational because your dad turned on Hogan. And I'm like, what? Like, and I was like, a funny thing is, like, I was at some of these matches, right? And I was in the dressing room, and so I don't even know why it's a big deal. That was just a Tuesday, Yeah. And but you've had probably an interesting childhood, more than most, and certainly more with me, because I'm so grateful my father never did wife swap. That's not true. I think I would have preferred him to do a wife swap permanently at one point in my life, but I shouldn't say it. But no, I'm sure my dad swap was probably on my mom's mind. But so you did wife swap. I don't like I that was a long time ago.
It was.
But I haven't. I saw a brief clip like on YouTube, but what? Sorry.
Hey, keep a straight face now.
I can't. Okay, what was that like? Because that had to be. I mean, obviously, the thing is that I imagine your dad went into character on that show, and so I have to think that when you saw it, you're like, that ain't how dad is at home. But I could be wrong. So tell me what that was like.
It was interesting. I think. He definitely went into character a little bit, but I actually remember being surprised at the time that he still was very relaxed and it was a little bit of a mix of his character and how he is at home. I think mostly he was just terrified for my poor mom. That's what I remember, getting sent to Ric Flair. I remember the whole time he was like, what have I done? But no, it was a lot of fun, and it was all in good fun. It wasn't anything that any of us took too seriously going into it. But we still wanted to be somewhat authentic to our family, because it is true when you watch Wife Swap how isolated we were on the ranch that was our actual ranch that we lived on, and how just kind of in our own worlds we were, I would get up before school every day and I would take care of our animals on the ranch. And those were the things we had Wendy doing, the poor girl. So she's out in the dirt and the mud with the goats, and she's feeding bloodworms to the fish and like all this stuff. And so, I mean, it was pretty authentic to our lives. And I feel like it was harder for my dad to be in character with how authentic we were making it to our lives, if that makes sense. But we did get him in. I don't know if this made the final cut, but we did get him in to get a pedicure. And I think that was the funniest day of my life. It was so great seeing him get a pedicure.
which is hilarious because my dad has a video of him getting a manicure and a pedicure. And let me just tell you, I went to my first pedicure with my father, not with my mother.
No.
I swear, in Fayetteville, there was this little place next to Kroger, and my dad was going like, "Hey, you want to go?" I'm like, "Oh, sure, whatever." I've never been, but my mom took him there, and he wouldn't do it that often, but he would do it. I swear.
Oh wow.
Like, I seriously shaved my body from the time I was like 10. Like, I'm serious. I almost shaved my eyebrows once because Dad shaved everything, and they were telling me how long my eyebrow. I swear they had I'm up in the mirror. I'm about to do it. And my dad's like, no. And I'm like, well, y'all keep saying how hairy I am. So I in high school and I have like chicken legs, like I would shave my legs and people were like, what a weird. I'm like, but that's what I grew up with. It was
so normal.
It was so normal.
I grew up with my dad and my brother both shaving.
I would have to shave my dad's back for him before he go out of town.
I know. I was like, I thought it was so normal. And I actually have a kind of gross story.
Go for
to
it.
go with that. But so they used to shave their legs, all of that. And one time when I was a teenager, like preteen, I got a staph infection on my knee and couldn't figure out how we got it. Turns out my dad was using my razor. That was great. That was really perfect. Good old wrestlers for you.
Oh my God. Okay. So I went to use my dad's razor once and he ripped it out of my hand. And I was like, what? He's like, I got mat face. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
It's like, from seriously, it's called like a mat face. It was like mat fungus. So he had a beard. He had a beard like all through the 70s. And I and people are like, I never saw Paul with a beard. He couldn't grow one by the time because if he grew any hair on his chin, he would get a fungus would come out. So he had this green. Oh, yeah. They had all. Man, my dad had I always tell people, I'm like, I feel like I could have gone into medicine. At least as a pharmacist, because of all the things I saw happen in my life and the different pill selections that came through. Like I was the only one 10 years old going, hey, that ibuprofen's a little tough on your stomach. I think you should
absolutely
make sure you get some tuna fish first.
I still have people ask me about injuries and things because they know I've seen so much with my dad. And who cares for their injuries? Us, we did. And so I know how to dress wounds. I know how to do all of that stuff. And I'm so used to it.
I hate it, but I remember because my dad was the same way, right? Mm-hmm. You tried to fix it before you went to the doctor, first of all. Yeah. I remember a couple times I needed stitches and my dad would just take tape and he'd be like, just leave it there for a couple of days and then let it breathe. Like, I'm serious. That was just, how you did it. But yeah, I don't think people understood what it was like. So I was 18 when he broke his neck and he couldn't get out of bed. He couldn't move. He couldn't wipe himself. Like it was, I mean, and let's just be honest, when he was as big as he was, he could barely get his arm back there anyway. But yeah, your dad, and I don't mean this, and my dad had to say, he's like, nothing worse than a dog chasing cars and a broken down wrestler chasing me. Hogan, I think you got a little of both in you. But I remember having to deal with my dad's, the physical therapy because he's got his knee replaced. And it was always something, but he was really hurt from the time you were born.
Yes.
My dad was similar because he had the arm, but not a full hip replacement. I didn't realize he was 40 when he got it. I thought he was 50. I didn't realize it was that 40. Early.
He was young. And actually that reminds me, when he was diagnosed with cancer, it was because he had, I can't remember exactly what, but there were discs in his spine that were broken or whatever, and they were cutting into his spine. And so they had to fuse his neck, a really large portion of it. And he, after that, couldn't do any of that. And actually seatbelts around the same time, I think, became, you had to wear them. It was a law. It was illegal if you didn't wear your seatbelt. And he kept getting pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt. And they sent him to a seatbelt class, which he loved. And in the class, He kept writing it off, going, I don't need a seatbelt, because it was too painful for him at that time to turn and put a seatbelt on. And in the class, they showed a video of a father who was in a car accident, and unfortunately, his body became a projectile in the car and killed his child because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And it stuck with my dad. It really hit him hard. And every single time he got in the car after that, no matter how painful his fused neck was, he would go through it and put his seatbelt on because he was so scared of what would happen to us kids.
It's just funny to hear these stories. You just don't realize how much I had the exact same experience with my father. He didn't get pulled over for anything, but when I want to say it was like 2001, he had bought this Toyota Land Cruiser from 1973 Toyota Land Cruiser, and he got it completely redone. And one of the things he got done, two things he got done. One, he got a seatbelt that was just around his waist.
Oh.
And that was legal in those cars.
Oh, wow.
And he got a special mirror put on, like it looked like a truck driver mirror, but he put the extra mirrors on because he couldn't turn at all. Like it was impossible. He could not turn his neck. So he had a special mirror. But he actually, when he got the Land Cruiser, one of the things he was telling me is like, I don't have to worry about a seatbelt anymore. Because pulling from up here and it was so difficult. And so he would have to, and he did it left-handed because his right arm was paralyzed. So he couldn't turn and he couldn't use his right arm. So, because he would just pick up his arm and put it there and then he could function like from shoulder and hand, but not elbow.
Yeah.
But yeah, like these guys had injuries that you wouldn't think would bring up the weirdest scenarios. Like, I don't want to use a seatbelt. I remember my dad, when we would go to restaurants, we walked into some, sat down in a chair and got up and left. Yeah. He's like, I can't sit here for 45 minutes. But your dad had split discs. Mm-hmm. And that though, my dad had it in his shoulder. And once that happens, it's just like bone spurs. It's like unbearable pain. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that, not to go back onto the darker side of this, but do you think that that was a pretty big cause for the alcoholism as well, is just dealing with that pain? Because I've always believed they were always trying to, I think they were so used to going at such a high pace. They tried to keep that up, but they tried to Band-Aid it with alcohol and whatever else to keep going.
Absolutely. When it comes to my dad, and I think others as well, I get to a point where I don't know if it was the physical or mental pain that was worse. And both are absolutely what caused alcoholism. Although we do come from, alcoholism runs in the family. So it wasn't, I guess, shocking.
Well, I want to say something there, and this is me just getting a little being specific. This country has suffered from alcoholism in every generation for 200 plus years. This is nothing new. It wasn't until, I want to say 1900 where kids weren't drinking hard cider for breakfast because they didn't have clean water. So we have been drinking. I mean, people don't know that in during World War II, how many people got hooked on crystal meth or how many people died of morphine overdose in the Civil War. This country's been addicted to alcohol and drugs since its inception. It was founded by people that were opium dealers. So I always try to tell people when we say alcohol runs in our genes, alcohol runs in our country. And it doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a race. It doesn't have a gender. It is so ingrained in our society that we get caught off guard by it. But it has been like every one of our ancestors was an alcoholic because that was all they had to drink. Yeah. Now, I say that to say, alcohol that was made in those times was generally 3% to 2% alcohol, not 9% like some of these beers are today. But I always want to just take a step back and remind people that, from somebody who's gone through addiction, that we have got to destigmatize alcoholism as if it is indicative of how you grew up. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I 1000% agree. My dad suffered from shame more than he did anything else in his life. Yeah. That shame and pain from his childhood hurt him more. That's why I think he had the pain threshold for pain he did, because he knew what real pain is. And there's a big difference between hurting your arm and being suicidal from how you were treated or having to deal with, being molested. And so I always want to just share that from my own personal experience, and not that you said anything wrong, but just that I'm passionate about making sure we understand that, you know what, this is not new, and we all need to quit getting blindsided by it and start teaching and discipling people around this at a very early age, so that they learn to deal with their emotions, so they don't drink to band-aid their life. So, do you think your dad had just so many regrets it was hard to let go, and maybe later in life he realized kind of, man, I really am actually forgiven?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he definitely had a lot of regrets and a lot of pain that he band-aided, for sure. Yeah. And you're right. You're absolutely right about how our country has been built on that, and going on with that. You know, even as a mom, we're constantly seeing mommy wine night. Like, it's so prevalent and hard to get away from. And everyone uses it as a Band-Aid, you know. I get it.
It's only worse now, obviously, with the pandemic, and you know, it scares me to think when people get back to normal life how they'll adapt, because you know, obviously we've seen a it's all like all these things logistically are slowing down, but man, we have not run out of booze. I've yet to go to the store and then be like, yeah, we ran out of beer this week. Not once. Well, I can't find toilet paper or anything, but those shelves are stocked.
Yes. And I do say all of this. I mean, I do drink wine. I do drink in general, but I have always been very careful about how I do that, how I go about that.
And I look, I struggle. I'm not demonizing anybody. I'm the first to say but it did bring me a lot of freedom to go, oh, it ain't just me. It ain't just my family. This is literally everybody. Right. So, now, Falon, I know we don't have a ton of time, and I always try to keep these, you know, fairly short. That way, I can try to talk you into coming back later on in life. I don't want to take all the stories, but you know, I know that, you know, my experiences with my dad were different than most people's. We had 2 fights in our entire life. 2. One of them, we didn't talk for 6 months. He got mad at me. I got mad at him, and it was over something stupid. Like, he wanted something from me, and I was like, I can't do it right now. And he got mad, and I got mad, and I cried every night for like 6 months. And then finally we talked. And then one time when I was 21, he got mad at me about something, and he came back and apologized really like within 24 hours. So I had just an amazing experience with my dad until later in life, when his life diminished, and, you know, I was dealing with my own struggles. But, you know, if there's one thing I always try to tell people about my father and I'll continue to say, is I have no question about what his intent was in life. And it was to love people. Like, he didn't feel loved, and therefore bringing that fun and entertainment to people really was a motivator. You know, you hear a lot about, you know, people that are bipolar or that deal with depression being great comedians, and it's part of the perspective. So I know that my father and that persona he built was to protect the inner child. And but I'll always end with, my father would tell you all day long that persona was not who he was or who he wanted to be. He would have much rather been loving all the time. That just isn't what he grew up with or knew how to do, but he learned it later. What would you want people to know about your daddy?
I mean, you're absolutely right with everything you said. I feel that's very relevant to my dad as well. He always spoke to me about how you are never above anyone. You know, no one is below you in the world at all. You love everyone because that's what we're here to do. That's what everyone needs, you know, is love. And I think that would be one of the biggest things, is he put on this hard shell, this hard act in his character that was crazy and offensive and just this whole thing. But at the end of the day, all he wanted was to show people love, like you said, that he didn't get, and show his kids love. Oh man, his whole world was making sure that us kids felt loved.
Actually, can I stop you right there? Tyler, do you have that queued up?
I do, yeah.
I'd like to do this if you wouldn't mind listening to me. I was just a street kid. People talk about WWF wrestling, and I was just a kid born. I didn't have no mom and dad. And no, this ain't no Lassie story. I grew up, and if it wasn't for professional wrestling, I'd probably be in jail someplace, man. But instead of that, Instead of that, I ended up marrying a beautiful American woman. I got 2 little American girls. I've been stabbed 3 times. I've been shot at. Went down twice in an airplane. It didn't bother me or make me want to retire. I got a little girl 4 years old. Some days I go on the road for 50 days at a time. Last time, a little girl grabbed me around the leg and she was crying and she asked me not to go anymore. And I can handle anything. You can shoot me, you can stab me, you can spit at me, but I ain't gonna let them go without a daddy like myself, man.
I think that says it all.
I agree. He really, truly was an incredible father who gave us so much love. And he wanted everyone to feel that. I mean, he loved his kids, but he would love anyone's kids as his kids, or just anyone. He really hated how ugly the world could get sometimes.
It's funny because the times that I spent with him, it wasn't like I got to spend with days with him, or not like I never went to your house or anything. But it's funny that if anybody ever asked me about Roddy Piper, the only memory I can think of is his coming up and hugging me and kissing me on the cheek at the Hall of Fame. But that was consistent. Like, he was always like that with me. I can remember being in the dressing room and him, just staying with me for a few minutes and checking in on me and playing cards when, because it was different wrestlers. A lot of times we traveled, it would be the same guys in same towns for weeks. So it would be JYD for 3 weeks because that's who we were traveling with. Right. But he was so genuine, and then, just to be honest, as a wrestler, without question, the best talker ever. And, but most people don't know, whenever I would see him, afterwards, he was so chill. Like, he was not this hyper. I never, not hyper at all.
He was so quiet and calm.
I always say, I'm like, he's like Woody Harrelson. He's smoking a joint and he's chill. He's like, hey, I'm Roddy. Like, he'd be like, what's up, Jeff? It was never like how this hype version. So it's just cool that they had a persona that they could turn on, and be a totally different person and take us on that journey. And your father took us on so many journeys, to the point that I have always been nervous when it's like my dad and your dad's promos. I'm like, if HR sees this, I don't think they're going to let me work here, But if you go, and because if you go back, it's a lot of politically incorrect stuff. But it's funny that they never. It was always believed to be, wrestling, but there's no question that your dad's name will be on that mountain of Mount Rushmore of wrestlers. Your dad is up there, but I think it's even better that he's up there for being a father.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that.
I am going to wish you the best for this new baby and for you and for the weather. And thank you so much for coming on. We love you. We want to see the best for you and your husband and your family. And we'll keep in touch. And then maybe on down the road, we'll have you come back on. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on.